Well, welcome everyone to this episode of Stories for Healing. It's amazing. We're finishing our first month of this. I thought it would be a week. And here we are at a month, and we've got another month's worth of storytellers lined up to share. So clearly, this is something that you all are finding helpful, and I know we as storytellers are finding it helpful as well. Um, what we do, as you know, is tell a story every weekday, and you can find them on our Facebook page, or you can come over to YouTube and find the archive there. And it's something that we're all hoping just helps with a little healing and reconciliation and a little growth. Today, I'm very happy to welcome back Cassandra Cassandra Wye. Sorry, it's one of those days. To tell us another story. So, Cassandra, please tell us a story.
Thank you. I want you to imagine the land that is called Korea, where the winters are long and dark and cold, so very cold, and the snow lies deep upon the mountain. And at the edge of the mountains, there is a forest. And at the edge of the forest, there are fields. And at the edge of the fields, there is a village. And once, within that village, there lived a man and a woman who had loved each other since they were boy and girl. And when they became old enough to be married, they were married, of course. And they built a house, a home together. And as they built, they planned, they dreamed, they schemed of the life they would weave together as they wove together the bamboo that made their house, their home. But war came, and the man went away to fight, to protect his beautiful, precious home. But when he came back changed. When she tried to sit him down and talk to him, he would turn away from her and look out of the window, up at the mountains, away from anything at home or at her. And when they lay in bed at night, he would flinch away from her. And if she tried to press him, to talk to him, to question him, to ask him, what has happened to you? Why have you changed? He would turn and run out of the house and into the fields and up into the forest and into the mountains. And sometimes it would take hours before he came back again. And sometimes at night, she would wonder if he would come back again. And sometimes, in the dead of night, she wondered if she wanted him to come back again. And so she began to realize that something had to change. She went to the wise man, the medicine man of the village, and said, please, can you make something, some potion, some lotion that will bring my husband back to me? And he said, there is one thing I can make. Then make it. But there is one ingredient missing. And you must find it for me. I will, but it will cost you. I will pay whatever price it costs. What do you need? And he said, the whisker from a tiger. Very well, she said, I will find you one. And she turned and walked out of his house. And as she slammed the door shut behind her, she thought, what have I said? What have I done? How will I find a tiger, let alone steal a whisker? But then she thought of her husband, and she began to plan. And so the next day, She wrapped a blanket around her and she tied to her waist a bottle of water and a bag of dried food and a knife. And then she turned and walked out of her home and through the fields and into the forest and then into the mountains. And as she walked, she looked down on the ground, looking for signs of a tiger. And she listened to see if she could hear the sounds a tiger might make. And all the while, for hour upon hour, she kept on walking, endlessly walking, until at last she saw at the bottom of a mountain a cave. And outside the cave, the ground was scratched and torn and the snow broken. And she wondered what animal had made those marks. And she wondered if it was the one she wanted. And so she hid behind a tree and in the undergrowth and prayed to all of the gods that whatever it was, it would not see her or smell her. And she waited as the cold fell and the sun disappeared and the sky turned dark. And then in the twilight, the grey light, she saw a flicker of amber against white. And a tiger walked past her and into the cave. And she felt as if her heart would stop beating. It was beating so fast, it thudded against her ribs. And she thought, however am I going to get close enough to a tiger? But then she thought of her husband. And she came up with a plan. And she wriggled herself back out of the undergrowth and onto her feet and back through the forest and back to the fields as the sun began to brighten the sky. And there were her goats wandering around looking for food, as goats always do. But the snow was too deep. And so she got down on her hands and knees and dug away at the snow and picked some of the grass and held it out to the goats. And one of them came up to her and nuzzled against her and ate. And as the goat ate, she stroked the goat. And as she stroked the goat, she took her knife and slit its throat. And as the blood poured down her dress and into the ground and onto the snow, she waited until the goat was dead. And then she took her knife and carved the goat up into pieces. And she ripped off part of her blanket and wrapped it around the meat. And then she took this bundle, this gift, back through the fields and through the forest, into the mountains and towards the cave. And she waited until just before twilight to open her bundle and place a piece of meat by the foot of the cave. And then back she went into the undergrowth and hid. And the tiger, a flicker of amber against the snow, came back, smelt the meat, smelt the human on the meat, and looked around, and then ate. And she waited as the tiger went back into his cave before she allowed herself to breathe once again. And so the next night she did it again, and the next night again, until she plucked up what little courage she had left to rip off a piece of the blanket and place it under the meat. And as she hid, she waited. And the tiger came back and stopped and stared at the blanket and smelt the human smell even stronger. And his gaze looked around into the dark and saw her. And then he turned away and ate the meat and walked into the cave. And she thought as if her heart would break. But that night, When the tiger was asleep, she crawled into the cave up towards him and knelt beside him and lay a hand upon the tiger's flank and felt him breathe warm. And the next night she did it again. And the next night she did it again. And she allowed herself to begin to stroke the tiger. And she felt the tiger's breathing begin to change. And to her amazement, she felt the tiger begin to purr, a strange and rusty sound. And she stroked the tiger night after night, until at last she allowed her hand to linger up against the tiger, and she took hold of the tiger's whisker and she pulled it free. And the tiger did not even flinch. And she backed out of the cave and onto her feet, and clutching the whisker aloft, she went back through the forests and back through the fields towards her home, where the wise man stood outside of his house and watched this apparition come towards him, what was once a young girl he knew from childhood, so pretty, so quiet, so neat. Now ravenously thin and covered with blood, her hair scratched and torn, her eyes glowing like a tiger. She came towards him. Here it is. Make my medicine. There is no medicine, he said. What? You promised me. And her eyes glared at him ferociously. I'm sorry, he said. There is no medicine on earth that will bring your husband back to you, but this advice I give to you. Please listen. If you treat your husband as you did the tiger, as delicately and as sensitively, as gracefully, as tenderly, then he may come back to you. And she looked at him, glared at him, stared at him, and then nodded once and turned away and went back home. And she did as the wise man had told her. She treated her husband as delicately, as tenderly as she had the tiger, until at last he came back.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. It's a wonderful story.
It's a lovely one.
And, you know, one thing of, not the only thing, but one of the things that stood out for me was at the very end there, when the wise man tells her there is no cure. She is not happy with that answer. And it seemed to me, listening, and I think for me, it seemed to me that she recognized just how much work lay in front of her. Yes, she knew what to do, and yes, she was capable of doing it, and yes, there was, you know, the lesson was taught and clear. But even when we know what needs doing, it doesn't mean that it's easy. No, and that really came through for me in that.
It's somewhat inspired by the work I've done in hospitals and thinking about what's going on in hospitals. I mean, I work, as you know, on a cancer ward with children, and you see the parents facing up to the enormity of what's in front of them.
Yeah.
And it is almost beyond belief what they have to go through. I had no idea.
Yes.
And you see them take this on, and it is just such with such dignity and grace.
Yeah.
And it is, you are there to support them as much as you are their children.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
And you just that's really where the story came from.
Okay.
That understanding of what people go through
Yeah.
when they look after someone they love. And there
Yeah.
are lots going through that at the moment, and we have no idea what they are going through.
No. And no matter how many times we've seen families and parents go through that, we still have no idea. I mean, it's still, we can appreciate it certainly, but yeah, it's a very narrow path to walk. Very narrow path. Thank you again, Cassandra. Thank you. So, folks, here we are again at the end of another episode, and really just what inspires us, what inspires me, and I think each of us, is not that there's some magic solution. We just click our fingers and everything will be fine, but knowing that it is possible, and knowing that it is difficult can make it actually seem more possible, that it isn't just something that'll come to us because we happen to be wishing the right way or saying the right words, but we're putting our hands to the effort that it takes. And so it is with reaching out to each other. It doesn't just happen because you say, "Oh, I'm going to open up and everything will be fine." No, it's good, hard work that needs to be done, and it can be done. It can be done. So visit us on our Facebook page or our YouTube channel. Tell stories to each other, and put your hands to the good work that awaits us all. Thanks again. Bye-bye.